Well, thank you very much for the very kind introduction, the warm welcome. It's very dangerous to give that indication to go over time, especially on this topic. But I always find the most important aspect of these opportunities to be your questions. So I think we'll try and leave as much time as that for possible as possible. But in the context of discussing genocide, I perfectly understand my role here as the lawyer to set out, the legal definition and talk a little bit about how this term is being abused with respect to Israel, what the possible ramifications are for that, of that, and also to look at a little bit more detail at the allegations that South Africa has been advancing at the International Court of Justice. So in terms of the definition of this term, this is the only bit I'm going to read out to you, and it's from Article 2, essentially, of the Genocide Convention. So the 1948 Convention on the Punishment and Prevention of the Crime of Genocide defines the concept of this crime. And it does so critically by focusing, the key aspect of this crime is intention. The intention to destroy a group in whole or in part. And this is a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. That is the characterizing element of this crime, the intention to destroy a group in whole or in part. And then there are a number of acts that are listed according to this definition, which include killing or causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. That's the legal definition of genocide. Now, where did the term come from? The 1948 Genocide Convention is important. Its timing is important because this was a response to the Holocaust. The term genocide was coined by Raphael Lemkin, a Jewish jurist, to provide some form of terminology to the Jewish experience of being targeted for extermination because they were Jews by the Nazis in the course of World War II. And the intentional aspect of this is therefore key, both to the way it has been recorded in Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, but also to how this has been carried across into the statute of the International Criminal Court, the Rome Statute, and that has included this crime in Article 6 of the founding statute of that court. The fact that South Africa has made this allegation against Israel is plainly an inversion of reality. It is monstrous, abusive, given the fact, of course, that the term itself comes from the Jewish experience in the Holocaust. To accuse the Jewish state of having perpetrated genocide is, extremely meaningful in a negative sense. But in a much more important, immediate sense, I think it's critical that we recognise that this is also about accusing the victims of the very crimes, of perpetrating the very crimes that were committed against them. And in that respect, I don't just mean the Jewish victims of the Holocaust, but I also mean the victims of those acts of genocide on the 7th of October. Because what I do not think can be beyond doubt, given that it was so carefully documented by the Hamas terrorists themselves, is the acts that were carried out that fall within the list I read out to you on the 7th of October, the killing, the slaughter, but of course also the rape and the torture, and the targeting of Jews, Israelis in those communities in the south of Israel at the Nova Festival because of who they were, because they are part of that group, that ethnic, racial, religious, national group. And the intention with which these acts were committed is also clear. It is something that Hamas leadership, and indeed those terrorists who have subsequently been interrogated and provided interviews to the Israeli security services, their intention they have made no secret of. For anyone that has watched the now 48-minute video compilation that the Israeli Defense Forces have compiled of material from the 7th of October from Hamas GoPros, from dashcam footage, there is also a recording, which has been much spoken of a terrorist who phones his parents on the telephone of a victim of someone that he has killed and tells them how proud they should be of him, how many Jews he has slaughtered. The intention is beyond doubt here, and was never, as I say, even sought to be hidden. And it's an interesting phenomenon that we see of the victims of these crimes being accused of perpetrating the very crimes that were committed against them. The fact that South Africa has made this allegation at the International Court of Justice is not, by accident. It is carefully considered, and it provides a legal hook by which South Africa seeks to bring Israel to the court. And that is because both South Africa and Israel are party to the Genocide Convention. That is the mechanism by which it has essentially grounded jurisdiction, and by which Israel has also participated in the farce that has been played out. And that's another aspect, the public relations side of the ICJ case, and how the proceedings themselves have been watched around the world and received in the media. I was on the equivalent of the BBC in South Africa, SABC, in the days immediately after the first provisional measures order in January of last year. I'll come on to talk about that order in a little bit more detail. And I thought that my counterpart on this interview summarised the motivation that South Africa had here perfectly when she was celebrating the outcome of what was being discussed from the provisional measures order. And she said, "Isn't it wonderful? Now we can finally use genocide and Israel in the same sentence, and nobody can tell us otherwise." And in that respect, South Africa has been successful in launching into this blood libel, this absolutely abhorrently false allegation against Israel, but they have shifted the Overton window. The parameters of acceptable debate here now, for some reason, include the discussion of those two terms, Israel and genocide, in the same sentence. And we have seen that spread like wildfire and gain currency. And one of the I think critical aspects of this to really bear in mind is how the proceedings at the ICJ have been so badly misrepresented, including by lawyers who certainly should know better and very senior judges in this country. And we saw that after the 26th of January in the first provisional measures order, where the world and his wife was reporting that the International Court of Justice had found Israel plausibly guilty of genocide, or had found that there was a plausible risk of genocide. Now, I think it was the 26th of January itself. I was being interviewed on Sky News, and the individual who was just on before me had also repeated this complete falsehood, this canard, that this is what the provisional measures order found. And I said, it's not true. I said, you just need to read the order. And it says in plain terms that what the court determined was that the case that South Africa brought raised plausible rights. Now, what that meant is that it considered South Africa's allegations and determined whether or not they plausibly fell under the Genocide Convention. I mentioned that the genocide issue was the hook, that South Africa was using the legal hook to bring Israel to the court. That is because it's the convention itself that forms the basis of the court's jurisdiction. So the only question the court asked itself didn't come on to consider the merits, didn't consider the evidence, that the supposed evidence that South Africa was raising. It didn't consider Israel's response. It considered whether there was a case that fell to be legally determined. And the question for that is, was the case that South Africa was raising something that fell under the Genocide Convention? And that has been the consistent position of the court through each of the provisional measures orders it has given. And lest there be any doubt, shortly after there was an evidence session at the Houses of Parliament, the Business and Trade Committee determining this question of presented with a potential arms embargo on Israel, wanted to hear evidence on what the International Court of Justice had so far determined in this case. About 30 hours after that hearing, the former president of the International Court of Justice, Joan Donoghue, came out on Hard Talk on BBC and said, I'm going to take this opportunity to clarify something. If you ask me, she was clarifying something that would have been clear had anyone actually read the provisional measures orders in the first instance, rather than projecting what it was that South Africa wanted the world to think about this case. So stepping back, and I know we're moving on to the specifics of this case rather than kind of the general generalities of the concept of genocide, it's important that we recognize the impact of these abuses of international law and abuses of international legal terminology and international legal institutions, because what's happening at the ICJ at the moment about this is a complete farce. It's been called out time and time again by the dissenting judge, the vice president of the court, Sebutinde, where each of these provisional measures orders that have been made simply require Israel to comply with its obligations under the Genocide Convention, which it has been applying and complying with the entire 12 months. In fact, Israel has a positive obligation under the convention to punish and prevent the crime of genocide. All of its conduct in Gaza, in pursuing its war aims of destroying Hamas as a political and military force and rescuing the hostages, returning the hostages, that is in compliance with its obligations under the Genocide Convention. But when we step back and we see the harm that is being done to the credibility that the International Court of Justice has, and let's not forget the driving factor now behind this case, we're told that it's the president of the court, Judge Salam, who has a vicious track record of anti-Israel comments in his role, previous capacity as Lebanon's ambassador to the United Nations, accusing Israel of being a terror state, of war crimes. I mean, in any international legal institution with credibility, an individual with that track record would recuse himself from a case of this nature. By all accounts, he is the driving force behind this case proceeding with priority on the court's docket. But if we step back and we consider the impact of these abuses of international law, this lawfare campaign that we're seeing carried out at the International Court of Justice, this is a problem not just for Israel. This is a problem for every state that cares about the rule of law, every individual that actually believes in an international legal order, because it's not just the credibility of the international legal institutions that is being called into question here. It is also the validity, the veracity of international law itself. And if genocide, which is and has historically been, in the aftermath of the Holocaust, the most heinous crime, international crime that one can imagine, if genocide is now being opened up to this abuse to be deployed as a political term to attack the Jews, then it is being deprived of its weight and its validity. And that spells, I think, an incredibly dark future for the international legal order, which was established after the Holocaust to seek to prevent these sorts of abuses. And I'm looking forward to your questions, because I know that there's going to be an awful lot more detail to delve into in due course. Thank you.